President Biden heading to Spain tomorrow to meet with NATO leaders in a test of both NATO and American leadership. Vladimir Putin testing that leadership today. Russia striking a crowded Ukrainian shopping mall with a cruise missile. Ukraine saying more than 1,000 people were inside at the time of the attack. At least 15 were killed. Meantime, a court in Russia setting a Friday trial date for detained basketball star Brittney Griner while extending her detention for 6 months as talks turn to a possible prisoner swap. Griner for a Russian arms trader nicknamed the Merchant of Death. Ukraine, meanwhile, says it's trying to free 2 Americans who volunteered to fight for Ukraine and are now prisoners of war. Former CIA covert operative Mike Baker joins us now. Mike, thanks for being here.
Sure, thank you.
Let's start with that Russian airstrike on a shopping mall. Are we naive to suggest it happened now because NATO is gathering? I mean, this does seem like a coincidence.
Yeah, and typically there's no real coincidences in situations like this. So, look, he launched a missile strike on the opening of the G7 conference, as if he was just rattling his cage and saying, look, don't forget about me, and I'm serious about what I'm doing. And so, whether it's a strike on Kyiv, whether it's this strike on the shopping center, whether it's an attack on a hospital, a school, whatever it is, what Putin has done over this period of time is demonstrate that he's not playing by the same rules. And so I think we need to understand that, and we need to get a little bit more serious. I know that we've been sending a lot of aid, as have our allies, but I think we really need to understand exactly the mindset of the individual who's running the show on the other side.
Now, there are divisions in NATO about Ukraine, and all of this in the midst of this war, and as it continues, does this war play more and more into Vladimir Putin's hands?
Well, from a military perspective, it does, because if it becomes a war of attrition, if you just look at Ukraine and you look at Russia, the numbers are decidedly in favor of Russia. And also Putin has shown he really doesn't care whether they take significant losses. And they've taken significant losses up and down the military command structure, whether you're talking about the generals that have died because they've been too forward in the operating theater, or whether you're talking about their soldiers. So he's demonstrated that if you're talking about a public sentiment perspective, then yes, typically the West gets tired. I don't want to say they get bored, but they get distracted with other things, right? And I think that's something else that Putin has weighed into this, is that he feels if he just waits this out, eventually much of the West is going to say, hey, let's move on. We've got Ukraine fatigue.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point. When does that happen? Because there have been moments when we're like, well, this is still going on.
Right, and I think it's already happening.
Yeah.
Look, Zelensky has been very smart, in part because of his age, his background, his experience. He understood the importance of capturing the high ground in the social media war. And that, in large part, gathered up all the resources of the U.S. and the NATO allies, because once it became a social media war, there was no way politicians were going to say, well, we're not supporting you. Now, the problem is that at the G7, they've said to Zelensky, they had a video conference, and they basically said, look, we're in it for as long as it takes. Now, what they need to do is explain what that means. Are we talking about just pumping resources and aid in there without ever sending troops in, because that's been our red line? Are they talking about doing that until Ukraine recaptures all the territory they lost pre-2014? Are they talking about just finding a way to get to the negotiating table? Frankly, I think what Putin is looking at doing is solidifying his hold on the East, making it more of a cohesive territory, and then probably at that point saying, yeah, maybe I can talk, right? Because at that point, I think he will have accomplished enough to justify to his public what he's done.
Mike, very quickly, one final question. I want to get to the Russian and United States strained relationship. There's no shying away from that. There's prisoners of war in Russia right now. And look, one of those prized pieces is basketball star Brittney Griner, and also captured Americans who volunteered for Ukraine. But today, Russia announced Brittney Griner's trial begins on Friday. Is this really all for show, or is there actually going to be a legal proceeding here where Griner could be found innocent?
Well, no, there's no real rule of law there. It's much like China. There's no real rule of law in China either. And so, unfortunately, Brittney Griner, through this trial, it's highly unlikely they're going to say, well, we made a mistake. You're free to go. Look, they understand that there's an advantage here. She represents leverage to the Putin regime. And so she is stuck in a very bad situation right now. And there's little that she or her attorneys could do. And frankly, given the world crisis that we're facing with Ukraine, there's little the U.S. government could do to try to assist her at this point. She's in a bad situation. Make no doubt about it.
Mike, thank you so much. Great intel there from retired covert operative, founder of the Portman Square Group, and host of the Black Files Declassified. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to NewsNationNow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.